welcome to today's webcast. We're calling it the best site design workflow in Civil 3D. My name is Brian Lewandowski. I am the Civil Product Manager at CTC, and I will be doing the presentation today. When we talk about site design, there's a number of categories here. There's basic site layout or 2D design. There's grading, which is a big piece of what we're doing. There are earthwork calculations, and there are QTO and legend creation and a variety of miscellaneous things there as well. Now, these are some of the main components when we talk about design. There's a whole other piece to it with plan production, obviously, to generate all your sheets. We're focusing on the design component here. And while it's a fairly complicated workflow to cover everything, what we're going to do today is go through a workflow and talk about all the different places that CTC tools plug into these and really change and speed up and improve the way you guys work in Civil 3D on these commercial site projects. So some of the tools we're going to highlight include one of our new tools, AutoGrader. It's rules-based automated grading. We're going to take advantage of Earthwork Processor. It's a dynamic earthwork calculation tool. We'll use a Label Genie a little bit. That's mostly focused towards plan production, but it really aids in the design process. It's a tool that automates about 85% of your labeling. And we're going to use Data Wizard a little bit at the end for some quantity takeoffs and some automatic custom legend creation. So starting with site layout, a lot of this is fairly straightforward. It's how fast can you draft out your site. But I did want to touch on one thing. When it comes to laying out your curb, I want to show you where one of our tools can plug in there. So if I jump into Civil 3D, here I'm at a place where I've got some initial polylines drawn that represent my gutter lines, okay? And what we're often doing is running offsets on all this stuff. And as that geometry changes, we have to, update those offset lines and so forth. So I wanted to plug in one of our tools right here so you can see how even in just 2D layout, some of these tools can really help. So we're going to take advantage of AutoGrader. We're not going to get into the grading portion quite yet, but we just want to take advantage of automatic offsetting. So all of these are polylines. I'm going to first grab these. I'm going to turn them into feature lines, and that's just because that's what AutoGrader works with. And I'm going to assign some elevations, but it's just 0. We're not doing any grading yet. Okay. Now all we need to do is create back of curb and lip of curb, and so we can take advantage of AutoGrader in this way. Now this is a tool that allows you to create grading families. In this case, we're not going to assign any elevations. We just want to create some offsets. I'm going to create a grading family of a type parallel. And what this is it'll take a parent feature line like the blue one, and it'll create any number of offsets for you based on a set of offset parameters. So we'll hit OK. We're going to call this family curve. Now, parent feature lines are the baselines that I'm going to use. I can select them in the drawing, or I can also use a filter. I can filter by layer or style or site or any number of things. I'm just going to pick this and grab the layer curve. Now with those 6 feature lines, I'm going to create a back of curve. So we're going to anchor that to the parent. We're going to go a distance at a slope. We'll go to the left side and we'll go our 8 inches. And since we're not doing any grading, I'll just leave it at 0%. We also want to create our lip of curve. And that's going to anchor to the parent feature line as well, but it's going to go to the other side. And that we want to count for a 1.5 foot gutter. Okay. Now it's going to create 2 feature lines for every one out here. Now I also perhaps want to control what kind of layering, what styles get assigned to this. Now this is just my site plan, so I'm mostly concerned with the layering and how it looks. So I'm going to use a layer I have in here called curb offsets so that it's different from the curb layer itself. Save out of here. I'm going to go ahead and hit run. You're going to see this update behind us here. It's going to create all these offsets at once. It's going to put them on the right layer. Okay. And the point of working with all this, or working with that, is as things change, as these parent feature lines change, perhaps this geometry, this entire curb line needs to move out here. Let's just do a simple stretch on here or some hot grip editing. Say this is coming out this way. If I simply run AutoGrader again, it'll update all those offsets. So AutoGrader plays into that 2D layout a bit. So I just wanted to highlight that to you guys. Now, one of the things we can do in AutoGrader is these families that we create, we can save them out to templates. This one, in fact, is one I probably want to use in my grading drawing because it's partially set up already. So I'm going to save this out. We'll save it to a standard JSON file, curve one. I'm going to overwrite the previous one I had. I'll save that, overwrite it. Okay, now all the parameters, everything defined in here are saved out to a template. I can reload that template in any other drawing, and I'm on my way. Now notice as we were creating this family, and as I click on it here in the main screen, it gives you a preview of what it's doing. There's the parent feature line. That's each one of the 6 solid red lines, the back, and then the lip. Okay. Let's move on to grading. Arguably, the biggest, kind of most complicated part about commercial site design. We're grading so many different areas, be it ponds, be it parking lots, miscellaneous areas around buildings, little concrete pads, or just trying to shape the earth to meet, be it ADA requirements in the parking lot, or just getting proper drainage across our site. And so grading is a big piece of this. So we're going to spend a bit of time on this. And we're going to look at grading out a pond and a parking lot, some of these miscellaneous areas. I want to touch on how do we handle curb cuts? What's the best way to handle that? And now you can do that by lots of manual feature line editing, but I want to show you a way that plugs in to AutoGrader and really helps speed that up for you. And then we're going to take advantage and use Label Genie to automate some of our labeling that helps while we're designing, while we're grading out our site. So let's jump into Civil 3D again. And here I've got kind of my initial site drawing, but I'm a little further along in my grading drawing. I've got that initial line work brought in here again. And what we're going to first do is start with a pond that we have to the north here. And I've drawn initially a baseline or a top of pond. And now what we're normally doing with this is we're running stepped offsets of this, and we end up with 3, 4, 5, could be 8 different feature lines to spell out that pond definition. Or maybe you're using these grading creation tools, and and if you're lucky, they don't break on you or disappear when you open the drawing. We're going to use AutoGrader to do this. And so let me show you how that will work. I'm going to come into here. We're going to launch AutoGrader again. Now this is a different drawing. So that curve family I created in the site layout drawing, that doesn't show up here. So these grading families save per drawing. And by the way, what we create in the drawing here, they're just standard feature lines. Okay, we're not creating any kind of like CTC AutoGrader object. So anyone that you might share this drawing with, if they happen to not have these tools, the only drawback for them is that it's slower to work in that drawing because they don't have those tools, but they'll still be able to work with all those feature lines. So let's create a new grading family called a parallel one. Now you notice there's a couple other family types. Perpendicular. This is great for subdivision lot grading, as well as template insertion, which is great for house pad grading and subdivisions. If you missed it, a few weeks back I did a detailed workflow on use of AutoGrader, many other tools in subdivision projects. So be sure to check that out on our YouTube page. We're going to do a parallel one again. I'm going to call it pond. Now, last time I did a filter, if I've got just the one feature line, I can just pick it like that in the drawing, and now it brings in that parent feature line, or what will be basically my baseline. And then from here, I can create any number of grading children, we call it. Okay, we choose an anchor point, just like I was doing before. We're going to do a distance at a slope. And instead of left or right, when you've got a closed feature line like this, perhaps it makes more sense to think in terms of inwards or outwards. I'm going to go a distance of 8. We'll go down at a 3-to-1 slope. We'll create another one here. We'll call this one our bench. And this one's going to anchor to the previous grading child, to the slope component right here. And from there, we want to go a distance at a slope inwards again. And we'll go 2 feet at a -10. Okay, now you can take these and you can copy them. So there's let's say a slope 2. We can anchor that to the bench component. And now it builds that out. Then perhaps one more, call it another bench. Actually, let's do 5 of them. Bench 2, we'll anchor that to slope 2. Go inwards. And as you're building this out, you might think, well, how big is this? You know, so at any point we can run this and see what we have. I'm going to click run out here. It'll create those feature lines for me. I get a sense of the size of what I'm creating. We can create one more. Let's do the final slope. I'm going to go inwards again, and perhaps we're going 12 feet at a -10. Okay. Now you can run it, see how that works out. Okay, maybe we want to go 10 feet instead. Run that. I'll have a small flat bottom down there. Okay. And notice these are coming in white. Perhaps we want these instead to be landing on a different layer. I also want to put them in my building site. Okay, when we're dealing with feature lines, sites come into play quite a bit. We'll be talking more about that in a bit. So I run this again. Now it's going to force those to go onto the right layer. And if I get back to the main form, these are all feature lines, right? So we want to make sure those are put into our surface. I've got control on my supplementing factors. Let's say we want to go 10 and 0.2. Now, if you don't know what these are settings available through native interfaces as well. We just automate it for you here. This has to do with the level of triangulation along straight segments and curved segments. Basically, the lower the number, the more triangulation you get there. You don't want to make it too low because your surfaces get too big and slow. So there's a decent balance. These kind of numbers in commercial site design work pretty well. I'm going to hit OK. Now, if I run this, we'll see all those break lines get added into a surface, and that shows up. So I've got a model view over here. You see that surface being built, and then in plan view as well. So this is how AutoGrader works for the grading portion of your projects. You build out different grading families for different components of your site. Now, if things move on this feature line, okay, this is like your baseline, or your, as we were calling it in there, your parent feature line. Anything you do to that, you simply refresh the grading family. So if you simply need to move the pond, just move that base, that parent feature line, and then come back in here, run the pond again, and it'll update in kind. Okay. Again, these are just standard feature lines. Here's that parent one I had drawn, and then each one of these are just standard feature lines that we can work with. Now, if I go in here and I make a grading change to one of these feature lines, and then I run AutoGrader again on that grading family, it's going to erase that stuff. Okay, so AutoGrader will apply the exact rules you specify in there, including overwriting vertices that you may have manually added. So there may be a point where you're done with AutoGrader and there's a couple little tweaks you want to do, but you'll be surprised how much AutoGrader can cover. So let's move on to some parking lot grading. Again, if you've got questions as we're moving along, feel free to type them right into the GoToWebinar system. I'll address them as I can, otherwise we will hold them for the end. Now, when it comes to grading out parking lots, it gets fairly detailed, right? Controlling the drainage patterns, meeting ADA requirements, and there's a number of other practices out there. In fact, I've taught classes on using corridors, on using grading tools, using feature lines, and we found what we think is just the perfect sweet spot for parking lots when using AutoGrader. It uses feature lines, which have arguably very small learning curves. They're easy to understand. They're pretty stable as far as objects in Civil 3D are concerned. And they allow any kind of manual control, right? So we're going to automate most of what we want to do at this parking lot with AutoGrader, and then we'll take advantage of any manual editing after the fact. And I also want to incorporate another piece of grading out parking lots here. Oftentimes, managing all the elevations across your parking lot becomes quite tedious. And so I like to, at least for a conceptual portion, preliminary grading of my parking lot, take advantage of a grid surface. That's a surface that allows us to read elevations from it, to assign elevations to curb islands, to this perimeter curb, and so on. And then once we do that, we'll use AutoGrader to create our tops of curbs, our back of curb, all that stuff. And then I'll show you how, as the grading changes because we're meeting different requirements, that sort of thing, we'll be able to very easily update all those feature lines. We've got 6 feature lines here, yet for each one of these, we need a top, a back, and a lip of curb. So we're gonna end up with 24 feature lines. Each feature line has a lot of vertices, becomes a lot to manage. That's where AutoGrader really comes into play here. So let's talk briefly about that concept of a grid surface. And I've got a couple things set up. I've got some initial feature lines drawn. Okay, these are just basic feature lines. And the way this works, if you haven't seen it or haven't tried it before, it takes a little getting used to, but I do want to mention it here because I know some people use it, and I want you to see how it ties in with AutoGrader. This is a set of feature lines that's going to represent the overall drainage pattern of my parking lot, including what slopes are right up at the face of the building and so on. And the way this works is you start with an initial set of feature lines that's very simple, right? There's no curves to it, so it becomes very few vertices to manage. We're going to start by adding all of these feature lines into a surface. I'm going to put this in a surface called parking grid. I'll hit OK to that. And now those are added into my surface. Now, the idea here is that your surface covers every vertex of those curved feature lines that you want managed by that surface, or as many as possible. And so in this project sample here, notice I covered everything but these feature lines out here, and that's because I want those to tie into existing grade. So one question came in about stage storage, a stage storage tool for ponds. Obviously, there is a standard stage storage tool in Civil 3D. You can certainly check that out. We didn't build that into AutoGrader though, because there's a number of tools, other tools available there. Now, one other thing I want to take advantage of is when we're working with these feature lines, understanding the slopes on them is really helpful. So let's put some labels on all these feature lines. And this is one area that Label Genie really comes into play nicely. Let's say we want to put line and curve labels on feature lines. And the feature lines we want to anchor them to are these yellow ones out here, these setup grid feature lines. On the formatting tab on Label Genie, I can choose my line style or my curve style. These are just styles that are in the drawing I'm working on. And we can add these to all these feature lines at once. Now that's just a quick use of Label Genie, but it's a really handy tool because it'll insert hundreds of labels at once. We'll do that a few more times with some other things as well. When we get the curve grading done, we'll put spot elevations in there. But these are grade and elevation segment labels that allow me to, as I'm manipulating this grid surface, I can come to here and let's say grab this feature line, and that's currently at a 1.5%. Let's say we wanted to go at a -2 instead, and it gives you that immediate feedback as you're working with it. Now, I put these on the grid lines. You can put them on any feature lines you want. If you guys don't have feature line styles like that, let us know. Happy to share these drawings with you so you can use that style that I have created in here. Coming over here, do a -2.25. Okay, and you can get an initial preliminary kind of drainage pattern. Now from here, what we want to do is to take these feature lines. Now these represent my gutter lines across my site. This grid surface represents the blacktop or the driving surface in my parking lot. So we're going to drape those feature lines on that surface. So I'm going to pick all of these. I'll do a select similar. There's a little trick I want to do here. If you're not familiar with it, when you want to assign elevations to many feature lines at once, it becomes a little clumsy. So take advantage of the previous selection routine. It's a basic AutoCAD function, and it works like this. First, do your select similar to grab all the feature lines, then hit escape, go to the modify tab, and run elevations from surface. Okay. It's going to ask you for which surface. We're going to do parking grid. And we're going to take advantage of a feature that's been added into Civil 3D in just the last few years, relative elevation to surface. So we're going to make these feature lines relative to the parking grid surface. We're going to hit OK. Now here's the trick with the previous selection. Down on the command line, I've got an option for multiple. So I'll click M for multiple. And now it doesn't tell me this, but if I do P for previous, and I hit enter, it's selected all of those. You probably can't see it through the screen, but it just selected all of those feature lines at once. Normally you got to go pick them all again. And I hit enter. Now I get all my little triangles and circles. That means it assigned elevations to each and every one of those. And all of these are relative to the surface. So if I was to open up Elevation Editor, for example, we would see that the elevation is relative. It's all set 0, and it's relative to the parking grid surface. What it means is that as that parking grid surface changes, those feature lines will update with it. Okay. So for example, here's that gutter line for that middle curb island. If I take this feature line and I go back to a -1.5%, -1.5, it was at a -2. If you watch in the model view over here, you'll see that update and see that gutter line move up. Now, there's a quick change there, but the point is that those feature lines stay stuck to the surface. Okay, now I said the grid surface concept is great for preliminary grading or conceptual grading. So at any point, we can take these feature lines and make them no longer relative to that surface. But we're just getting started, so we want to kind of automate a lot of the elevations assigned to these curve lines. You simply come in here and set it to none, and it'll strip away the surface assignment, and then it becomes just a floating feature line. Now, a word about sites. These red feature lines are in the building site. That's one site. The grid feature lines are in another site, a parking grid site. This means that they will not interact with each other where they cross. Now, there's a couple different strategies to this. The one I want to go through today is where you don't put them in the same site and they don't interact. It gets a bit messy. And so the one I want to highlight today is just keeping them in separate sites so there's no interaction with the exception of the grid surface, right? The grid surface, these feature lines are still sticking to that, so that surface changes will update those gutter lines. All right, we've got gutter lines, we've got initial elevations assigned to them from the grid surface. Let's go into AutoGrader. And now let's create a curb grading family. And in fact, we already have one. Remember that one we made in the site layout drawing? So we can bring that in as a starting point, but now we want to add some more detail, right? We need to assign elevations to it, and I need a top of curb as well. So I'll come in here. We're going to add a new component, and this one will be the top. Okay, this is going to be the first component of the list, so let's push it to the top. It's going to anchor to the parent, so that's the gutter line, and we'll go a distance to relative elevation. Go to the left side, go a distance at 0.167 and up 0.5 feet, okay? Now, you guys work in different areas, different standards, different units. If you're in metric, it all behaves the same. But this is just a curb standard around my area. Now from here, from the top, we're going to connect the back of curb to the top. It's going to go a distance at a slope of, this time just 0.5 for the top of curb at a 0% slope. And then the lip is going to anchor to the parent feature line. It's going to go to the other way still, but this time we'll assign our 2% slope. Now if we go into our formatting, we can verify again, are these the right styles and layers and sites I want to assign? Let's go in here and assign building site. Now this is important. What would happen if you assign parking grid? Everywhere these offset feature lines cross the yellow grid feature lines, they would assume the same elevation. So it gets kind of messy. So take advantage of sites when you're doing this. And one thing that's kind of cool here, we'll get to spot elevation labeling in a little bit. And what's common is we want to label just the back of curb lines. Now we're going to take advantage of Label Genie to label those back of curb lines, and we're going to reference it by layer or style. And so perhaps our back of curb we don't want on just the same layer as everything else. We could come in here and say, put that on a different layer. So just the back of curb feature line. So all of it's controlled in the family here, in the grading family. So I'll hit OK. Okay, so that's a cross-sectional preview of what I'm going to generate. We'll save and close this. Now, one thing about AutoGrader, right? I closed out. I didn't save anything. Say you were done working. I can save my drawing, close my drawing. I can come back here the next day, and any work I did is still there. So that grading family is still created. So I'm going to click Run, and what we'll first do is we'll see all these offset feature lines created. And that's going to assign the right layer and style for us. Okay. Now let's go and turn off my grid surface so we don't have too many surfaces building here. Set that to no display. I'll go back in AutoGrader. I'm going to run this again, but this time I'm going to make sure to assign my finish grade surface. And again, we've got our supplementing factors. Now, detailed curves, what's a good value? Somewhere between 5 and 10 for a distance, and 0.1 or so works good for mid-ordinate. So I'll hit OK to that. I'm going to click Run, and I didn't make any changes to the feature lines. It'll refresh them in case there were changes, but then it's going to also add everything to the exact same surface, this pond surface up here, or the surface that the pond break lines are in. So we run that, and everything gets added into the finished grade surface. Okay. Think about the amount of time it takes to do that stuff, right? Adding break line surfaces, not too bad, but you gotta keep adding stuff as you make new feature lines, right? Or if you gotta go in there and you gotta remove break line sets. Or what about creating all these feature lines in the first place? You're running stepped offset 15 or so times, typing in the values, right? Becomes really tedious, and that's what we're addressing in AutoGrader. Now it's cool, it's impressive to see it all kind of automate for us, right? But let's talk through some more of the workflow. How do you make this work for you? Now with the advent of this grid surface in here, what happens if we make changes to that? Okay, say we're still working with the grid surface. So let's come in here. Let's move that feature line. By the way, this quick elevation editor, if you don't use this, it's a really great way for manual editing of feature lines. Way better than elevation editor, because you don't have to worry about stationing. You just pick where you want to go. So I'm going to come here. This is going to go back to -2. We need some steeper slopes. Over here, we're going to drop this to -2 instead. Okay. Now let's look over here in our model view. It'll be clear over here. See how that curb island, right? It's kind of tapered. What happened? We just moved the grid surface up or down, and depending on the area you're talking about. The gutter lines moved with it because they're relative to the surface. But all the top and the back and the lip of curb feature lines did not move with it. Normally you'd have to recreate all those feature lines, right? Well, this is the point of AutoGrader. As those baselines, those parent feature lines change, right? That's the 6 feature lines here. We can simply run these grading families again. It's basically like a rebuild your corridor. I'm going to click run. We're going to see this stuff refresh, and we're going to see this curb island here update in model space, redo our break line set and our surface. Okay, so lots of different updates at once. Now, at any point, like I said, you can break free, so to speak, from the grid surface. At that point, you want to work with just your parent feature lines, just these gutter lines, adding certain little elevation points in here. Okay, something where you don't want to use the grid surface anymore. You want more detailed grading. Let's talk curb cuts a little bit. In the interest of saving a little bit of time, in our parent feature line, I put a couple elevation points to start with. Okay, let's say we've got a curb cut down here. Now those same elevation points get mimicked in our AutoGrader child feature lines, the offset feature lines. But what we need, right, is a curb cut right through here. Well, here's where we take advantage of feature line style hierarchy. If you're not familiar with it, it's a native function in Civil 3D. We come into our site, our building site. This is where all of our feature lines are. We go to the properties of feature lines. In here, we've got all of our feature line styles that are being used in that site. Now, what happens when 2 feature lines in the same site cross? They have to assume the same elevation, right? Well, which one controls? Well, if they have the same style, the last one edited is what controls. Well, that gets really clumsy, okay? If you keep track of the styles you're assigning to your feature lines, the one that's higher in the list will always control, regardless of which one is edited. This ties in really nicely with AutoGrader because it allows us to have basically dependent feature lines as well as primary ones, right? So what do we want in this case? Well, I've got a style called parent assigned to those gutter lines. Then I assigned a style of child to the offset feature lines. I'm going to create a new feature line at this curb cut. I'm going to give it a style of curb cuts. And because that's higher in the list than parent and child, it's going to force that cut in the curb. So it works like this. You first put in the start of the taper and the end of the taper in that base feature line. Okay. I'm just going to draw a polyline, and we're just going to go, in fact, we're just going to go past that point there. And we'll actually bring it back down a little bit. I just want to ensure that it's crossing all of those feature lines. Okay. I'm going to come up here to create feature line from objects. I'm going to grab that polyline. the site it's going to go in. We don't want it to interact with the parking grid. We want it to interact with the building site feature lines. This is where all the red feature lines exist. The style, this is key here. We want to use curb cuts because that's higher in the list in the hierarchy. And whatever elevations are assigned to that little curb cut feature line, they'll force those elevations into the curb itself. Okay, so that dictates what we'll control. What about the elevations themselves? Where do those come from? We're going to assign elevations and we're going to pull them from the parking grid. And we're going to make it relative to the surface because we're still working with our parking grid surface. So I'm going to hit OK to this. And it happened pretty quick, but you saw that parking or that curb cut come right in there, right? So it pulled down those feature lines, those top and those back of curb feature lines to force a curb cut in there, okay? Now, as long as we, there's two ways to do this. If you continue to work with your parking grid surface, since this feature line is relative to the parking grid surface, it'll move up and down with it, continually forcing that curb cut. So let's make another change to our design. The change could either be to the feature line itself, okay, if we weren't working with the grid surface anymore, or if we are working with the grid surface, let's go ahead and do that. We'll grab this feature line, and we'll drop this down to 2.5% again. Notice my labels update. Come over here, do the same thing to this feature line. Negative 2.25, we're going to say. And if you look over here in model view, you'll see things are kind of a mess, right? Everything's kind of cut all over the place. The curb is too high. Now the gutter lines moved up and down with it. The curb cut moved down with it, but now I've got like a 1 foot tall curb. Okay, so you got to think of which feature lines are sticking to your parking grid surface. It's those gutter lines and that curb cut one. Those already moved up and down accordingly. So at this point, what do I need to do? I simply refresh my grading family. I'm going to run this. You're going to see some of these contours update, and you should see feature lines over here update as well. So it's going to hold that curb cut to the parking grid surface, then it's going to update all of those offset feature lines based on their new elevations, or the new elevations in the parking grid. Okay. Sometimes you got to refresh a little bit. Like if I look in here, you can see that surface is popping up a little bit. It's still holding it. I find sometimes you just gotta a regen, or just move the feature line and it refreshes. Saving the drawing might do it right, but it forces that curb cut back in there. Keep in mind, there's no elevation points in these feature lines, these curb feature lines. There's not one here, there's not one in the back of curb, right? It's that crossing feature line that forces the cut in there. And since it's relative to the same surface that the gutter line features are, right, we can keep this very dynamic kind of setup going. All right, let's move on with some of the grading. Some of you are thinking, well, that's cool, you can automate all this stuff, Brian, but there's a lot of areas I just need to create a feature line and then add it into the surface. All of that can still be done. Okay, all we're doing to this finished grade surface is adding some break line sets, pond and curb. Anything else you want to do to this surface, you can do it, right? So there's a little grading pad, okay? Let's grab that, we'll turn it into a feature line. Put it in the building site. We're going to assign elevations preliminarily from the finished grade surface. Okay. Make sure I've got, let's say we want to raise that up a little bit, bring it up 0.5. Okay. And just like you normally would, right? There's no kind of duplication that needs to happen here. So I can just jump this into the same surface. like you normally would. Let's do 10 foot on the supplementing factors. These are those same things we're controlling through AutoGrader. But since we're creating all those feature lines for you and adding them to the surface for you, we give you control over that right in the tool. Okay, these parking grid feature lines, those do not go into our finished grade surface. Those are at elevations that are, finished floor is 835.5. My grid feature line is a half a foot below that. Okay, so that's representing gutter line feature lines, not grades right at the building. That same curb cut thing we did over here, you do the same kind of thing up here for pedestrian ramps. All works the same way. Obviously, you probably use 2 feature lines there. Okay. I like to pull in my existing feature lines. Okay, if we want to add this into the surface, this is where we're tying in to the existing back of curb. So we can call that X curb. The building, let's create a feature line out of that. We've got that created. Now let's say we want to do some grading on the back of the building. Let's create a grading family for that. I'll run AutoGrader. Sometimes a grading family can be pretty simple. I simply want to grab this feature line. And instead of the full range, I want to do just a partial range. We're going to go from right here. Let's go right at 21. Actually, let's snap right there. Okay. And we're going to grade just like 10 feet at a slope away from the building to ensure drainage away from the building. Now, depending on the feature lines drawn, what I like to do when I use AutoGrader is just add a touch here so we know it wraps around the corner. So we don't grade into the curb here. And then we want to bring it all the way to this point right here. And again, we'll just back it off a 1/10 so we know we're not wrapping around the corner. And all I want to do here is go a distance at a slope. We want to make sure we're going to the left. Go 10 feet at a -5%. Pretty simple. Save and close this. Make sure it's in the same surface. Okay. Supplementing factors. By the way, there's default values for this in your options. If I come up here, some default options in there. Actually, that has to do with daylighting. And then, so let's go ahead and run this. And we're going to see that offset feature line. That's also going to add both of those feature lines into the surface itself. Okay. What about grading limits on the outside here? Okay, I can do the same kind of thing I did here on the backside of the pond, and I can daylight to existing ground. Or perhaps you want to control it with a berm around here. I could daylight on a portion of the back of curb here. Let me show you just kind of a different scenario. Again, we're going to freehand a polyline in here. And these are going to represent, this is a berm around my pond here. We're going to tie in right there, okay? Now, there's a couple ways to do this. If we're trying to force a berm, right, give it some elevations, and then let's use AutoGrader to daylight to existing ground. Now, we could also just pull elevations from existing and dump that into the surface. It depends on what you're after. But I want to show you one other grading family type in here, which is the daylight to surface or target to existing surface option. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on a particular layer, grading limits. We're going to create a feature line from that. I'm going to assign some starting elevations of 834. Okay. I meant to keep that on the same surface or the same layer. Let's go back there. Okay. Let's go in and create one other grading family. So again, grading families can be pretty simple. You're just creating one feature line from another, but they're always relative to that parent feature line. So as you change that stuff, you simply run your grading families again, and everything will update for you. So we're going to simply do one. We're going to do a slope to surface. There's two surface targeting methods in here, slope to surface and distance to surface. We're going to go to the left side. We'll go at a slope of -20. And then my target surface will be my existing ground. Then in the settings option here, we even have control on how many vertices will be inserted, or basically the daylighting frequency of that resultant feature line. I've got it defaulting to 10, and okay. Save and close out of here. Final thing, add this to the finished grade surface, and then we'll run this grading limits feature line, and that ties in there. Okay. Supplementing factors, let's turn those on. Run this again, we'll get better triangulation down here. Okay. Now, as that changes, right, you move that parent feature line around, I can simply rerun those grading families and I'll update. What about spot elevation labels? That becomes a very detailed thing in our grading plans. Let's run Label Genie. I'm doing this right in the grading base. You can do it in a sheet drawing where you've X-referenced in these feature lines and data referenced the surface. I'm going to do it right here for expediency. We'll do a surface spot elevation. We'll attach it to the back of curb feature lines. Remember when we assigned curb back? That's what this was for. And then the vertices we want to attach to on those feature lines is everything but midpoints and at intervals. But you can see Label Genie can do just about any kind of labeling you want. The style, we're going to use an elevation only and then a marker. Orientation will be to the world coordinate system, but we can orient to an object. And we'll give it a 45-degree rotation. Hit add to this. 63 labels come in at once. Okay, applies a rotation. Now my scale is kind of big, so let's drop this down a little bit for clarity. Then we can see those labels come in. Now we're automating the rotation on some of these, so you can separate which set you're labeling, or they're just standard labels. So if you want to run manual rotations on your own, you can do that, right? But the majority of that labeling comes in automatically for you with the use of Label Genie. All right, lots to grading there. Hope I gave you some good ideas. Let's talk earthwork a little bit. We have a new tool that came out recently called Earthwork Processor. Earthwork calculations in Civil 3D and sites become quite complicated. I've got an example here where I've got varying subgrade depths. What we're going to go through is go ahead and do is create a subgrade surface or a hold down surface automatically using the Earthwork Processor tool. We'll calculate cuts and fills, we'll balance the site a bit, and then we'll send this stuff out to Excel, and you can see how Earthwork Processor really helps. So here I've got that same site again. I've got a few other things going on here just to save some time. I've got some polylines that represent what will be a heavy duty pavement area. I've got a medium duty, and then I've got a sidewalk, and finally a turf area. I've got a finished grade surface, and then I've got a profile from an alignment right over here running north to south through my site, so I can see I've got my existing grade. Here's my proposed. Let's see how Earthwork Processor works. There's really not much to it. It does all the work for you. I'm going to create a new earthwork set. I'm going to assign our proposed grade and our existing grade. And now I need to assign subgrade regions. These are the polylines I have out here. I can grab them manually, or if I've got some layering set up, I can simply use some layer filtering to pull those in automatically. So I'm going to grab layers with ERWK in the name, and it's going to pull in those 4 objects. Now for the subgrade depth, the hold down depth, it's going to read the elevation assigned to that polyline. I could also override it if I wanted here. And from here, it does the rest of it for you. So I'm going to click run, and it'll calculate cuts and fills for us for each region. If I change these, for example, say that should be 0.67 feet, 8 inches instead. I click the override, I click run again, and it recalculates, and we'll get different cuts and fills because my hold down varies now. Now, what is this creating? This is creating a number of things behind the scenes, but most importantly, it's creating a subgrade surface for us. Let me add that right into my profile view. Okay. So the left side here corresponds to the bottom of the alignment here. So you can see there's my turf area, 1/2 foot hold down, 1.5 foot hold down, 8-inch hold down, okay? And everything updates as what? As I change anything in those region objects, or as I change anything to my finished grade surface. For example, let's grab this curb island. Say that goes up 0.6 feet, okay? I've got those feature lines being duplicated through AutoGrader, so I can open up my AutoGrader. And I can run this again. It's going to update all those offset feature lines, just like how we were in the other drawing for the grading plan. I can recreate all those, refresh them in the surface, gives you a status bar. You know, depending on how many feature lines it's doing, if you're doing 100 of them, obviously it takes a little longer. Okay. Now, as I close out of this, it's going to refresh, but you're going to see, right, here's that curb island right here, and here it is in plan view. You're going to see that update. You're going to also see the subgrade surface update right with it. Okay. If I run back to Earthwork Processor, because the finished grade surface changed, this stuff needs to update, so I can run that again. We'll get new cuts and fills. And then let's take a look at balancing our site a bit. We've got a lot of cut here, and that's why, because my subgrade surface is mostly way below my entire existing grade. Maybe we design the entire site too low. Let's grab our building feature line. And all of our curb lines. Let's say we want to raise the entire site about 1 foot. Okay, my building, I'm grabbing all those curb feature lines. We're going to raise or lower these feature lines. Let's go up 1 foot. Remember, we had like 2,000-3,000 yards of too much cut, right? So we're going to bring everything up. You'll see everything kind of updated in my profile view there. Let's run the curb again. It's going to bring all those gutter lines, those tops of curbs, all that stuff will be brought up 1 foot now. You can see that stuff updating in the background here in model view. Okay, so this is a big drastic change, right? Move my entire site up 1 foot. I just want to give you guys a sense of how quickly it can respond to changes here. So now my finished grade is updated, my subgrade responds to it. So the subgrade surface is dynamic to the existing, or excuse me, to the proposed. And now to recreate my cuts and fills, I simply run this again. And because we brought everything up, we should see a big change, right? So we're a lot closer to balance. Obviously, I've got some more work to do there if I need to balance that out, but you get the idea. Now, what do we want to do with this information? If I look in options on labels and reports, I can insert MTEX labels and label cuts and fills for each region. I can also create tables, either in Excel or right on the drawing here, and I can control what shows in those tables. If I come back out here, let's go ahead and run the create table command. It's It's going to make an AutoCAD table for me based on the parameters I want to see using my table style. Okay, so that's not dynamic, it's a standard AutoCAD table. So if something changes in your drawing, simply refresh, run your Earthworks set again, and then just update your table. Okay, so all those cuts and fills, now the formatting and precision, all that stuff is controlled in the options of the drawing. Okay, almost there. One other thing I want to touch on briefly is just QTO and legends, right? In our site plans and our existing conditions plans, this is another tedious area that I find, and I want to touch on one other tool that really aids in your processes in these projects. So we're talking about quantifying, or putting in legends, curbs, and pavements. Now, QTO is a real painful thing. You end up manually counting this stuff. Legends, if you have one size fits all legends, that's great. But if you want to build custom legends and have it scan the drawings for just what's in there, this tool works great. So let's take a couple minutes on that, and then we'll wrap things up. This final tool I want to talk about is Data Wizard. It can scan my entire drawing and do a number of things with it. And count things up and put them into tables. Basically, all the myriad of kind of mediocre tabling tools you have across Civil 3D. This covers all those areas that don't cut it for you. In particular, custom legends or project-wide QTO. I'm going to do a quantity takeoff first. I've got a lot of blocks, polylines and feature lines and hatches, and I want to count things up and get areas. I'm going to scan my current drawing. I could load other drawings, but we're just after this current drawing. And when I'm going to scan for blocks and hatches and polylines, I had run this in here before. But just like AutoGrader, you've got filtering options. You know, only grab me objects on this layer, for example. And when we look at the results page, I can see, okay, I'm getting different tree types and vegetation, different hatches are coming through. Okay. Now, what information do I want to show? Okay, I can turn on my count column, 2D length, and area. I'll quantify all that for me. I'm going to write this out to Excel. Overwrite the spreadsheet I have there, and it's going to open Excel for me. And there's all my quantities, just that quickly, counting everything I had in the drawing. Now, it's very similar to create a legend. Let's do that right here. I'm going to grab the same components, which is basically all the site features. But this time I don't want area and 2D length and all that stuff. I just want to show the symbol itself and the layer description, which is the text that describes what this stuff is. And then in here, I start to get control on, because it's going to be an AutoCAD table down here, scaling values, the height of the cells, all that kind of stuff. So I've got a table style in here. I'm going to use that. And we can create a legend. You can do this in paper space, model space, you name it. Okay. It's taking the size of the objects in our drawing, applying them into an AutoCAD table here. Now, if you want that hatch sample bigger, you just simply choose a wider cell size in the wizard, and it'll do all that work for you. Okay. So that is Data Wizard, a really handy tool for custom legends for QTO. I find it actually more popular with QTO because we can scan any number of drawings. I've got a lot of contractors that do it for counting up for estimates on projects. Works really great. So I've got some questions I'll get to in just a moment here. I want to mention a couple other things, and then we will wrap up and get to those questions. So other things that might have come to mind as I went through things today, please type them into the GoToWebinar system now, and we will address those questions in a moment. So the stuff I went through today, I was touching on some Civil 3D core tool sets, when and how to use that stuff. I get it. There's a lot of other steps to it there. Those of you who are pretty new at Civil 3D. But I wanted to highlight where some of these CTC tools fit into that workflow and how they make site design, how they make the best workflow possible through those different tools. They're all part of what's called the Sim Project Suite. If you're not familiar with it, it's our flagship suite for Civil 3D users. It has all those tools I showed you today, plus many others. For current license holders, if you don't have some of these new tools, simply grab the new installer and it will give you that new stuff. This says after release. That's a typo there. All these tools are released, they're out there and available. If you don't own the Sim Project Suite, contact your reseller. In the US, that is ATG USA. In Canada, that is SolidCAD. These are their websites. And outside of the US and Canada, just go directly to CTC's website, CTC Software, to make an inquiry there. You can download free trials there, get anything you want. So with that, let's move on to some questions. Again, go ahead and type those into the system if you haven't already. One question was about AutoGrader. How does AutoGrader handle slopes on inside corners? Right, so I think most of the situations we ran into there, we were grading on outside corners, but what about on an inside corner? How does it handle it? Depending on the size of the corner, it's gonna kind of overlap things for you. But we're actually working through a little update on that where there's some intelligence built in, because we want it to work kind of like, this is one of the things that the grading tools, the native grading tools, do pretty well. And so we're going to build that into there, and it's going to handle those inside corners very well. But you won't have to depend on those grading tools, which get to be real buggy. So a question, how do you manage creation of solids for different pavement layers for different areas? I'm not sure exactly what we're after there, right? We can create solids from surfaces in Civil 3D. We can create solids between multiple surfaces. Okay, so in this earthwork drawing, we could create solids between these surfaces. If I go back to my profile, we can create solids there. I believe it's right. Extract solids from surface. Guess you can't do it. Oh yeah, from this surface to that surface. Okay, so if you're after creating solids, that's what I'd recommend. Utilize Earthwork Processor to get these different surfaces, and then you can create those solids as you need. It will get tricky if you're right. If you got a surface across the whole site, you want it just for certain areas. I guess you'd have to break those surfaces up a bit. It's a little tricky. Let me follow up with that question. Might be something more we can do to help with that. The key thing that we're after is we've generated the geometry, right? That subgrade surface. From there, generating solids, there's a lot of different things we can do there. Question came in too, how quickly can we create a 2D polyline from a feature line? It's pretty quick. It's a native tool. I was just running here, which is just create feature lines from objects. You can grab 100 polylines at once. Some of the routines in AutoGrader, our tool will allow you to grab polylines and automatically turn them into feature lines. For example, this method right here will grade existing polylines and it'll turn them into feature lines. So if you've got lot layouts completed, it can take those flat polylines, automatically turn them into feature lines, and then assign high points and low points as you define them in a what's called a perpendicular gradient family. Okay? And if you're interested in that more, check out the webcast I did a few weeks back on a subdivision design workflow. Question came in about QTO. Will the tool I showed, Data Wizard, will it count quantities for pipe networks? The answer is no. Pipe networks ended up being quite complex. We didn't put them into that tool set. What we do have is another tool coming out shortly that is going to allow extraction of entire pipe networks into Excel. It's much like our pipe designer tool, but you can take the entire pipe network and you can bring it to Excel for perhaps running analyses and then syncing back to your drawing. You can run those analyses right in the drawing, define analysis formulas right in a spreadsheet right within Civil 3D. You can create pipe depth reports, all that kind of stuff. We're just wrapping it up. It's going to release with our 2022 update, which is probably about a month and a half out. So I don't have that built into Data Wizard. I want to get it there, but the first thing is going to be that pipe jammer tool. So that's going to really help with all the different ways you want to tabulate and quantify pipe networks. A follow-up question on that: will it be able to separate items based on specific parts? Absolutely. You're going to have sorting options in there, be it 8-inch or 12-inch or PVC versus RCP, you name it. You'll be able to separate that stuff, sort it, because we'll be able to extract all that information, part size, name, description information. That'll come out, and then we can separate it and sort it in that way. So that new pipe network tool I'm talking about, it's mostly geared towards analysis and design of the pipe network, but it will also really help quantifying of things, reports, tabulations, you name it. So lots of good stuff with that tool as well. I don't see any other questions at the moment. I'm going to hang out for another moment here, see if any other ones come in. Feel free to type them in the system. I'll hang out here and address those. You can always email us, go to our website, ask a question, whatever you might have. If you guys haven't seen our YouTube page, we've got tons and tons of videos on there, like I showed you today, different practices using our tools, how they plug right into the native workflows in Civil 3D. It's one of the things that we're really big on at CTC, is to not basically erase or kind of change the entire way you're doing things, but just drastically improve it, right? AutoGrader, we're still working with feature lines. We're just automating the creation and the editing of them. Label Genie creates standard Civil 3D and AutoCAD labels. It just, instead of picking and clicking one at a time, it does it for you. So a lot of detailed stuff on Label Genie as well. So go check out videos on that if you guys haven't seen it. So with that, I don't see any other questions coming in. I wish you guys a wonderful day. Thanks for hanging out.